there's a series of papers by both Phil Converse and, in a different way, Wendy Griswold, where they both end up arguing for propositions that are, what is, Wendy calls them provincial, parochial, positivistic. They're not just based on case studies. There is a comparative reference for both of them, but there is a narrowing of the generalization and the theory. Phil Converse, who, as you know, is an election expert and one of the leading political scientists, actually he's trained as a social psychologist, never had a political science course. Phil has a couple places where he talks about having a theory which you go and have to find the right constellation. He has a theory of electoral politics, and to find it in other societies, it just has to be the right combination of societal characteristics that make it, that you can apply it. And he shows a case where, he could take the theory he had developed in an American context, and he found the right constellation in some Latin American country for the nature of the party system and so on. And yes, he did find the voting behavior that he thought would come up in that constellation of party politics and national constitution. So that's a very circumscribed notion of a theory, as opposed to the generalizing. There's no Einstein here, right? There's no general
grand
relative
unifying theory. Right. But more similar to what Tilly now talks about is kind of an aggregation of causal mechanisms, which aggregate in different ways in different times and places. What's general about that is that, you know, this specific mechanism of contention works in the way that it's laid out, but it's kind of a small scale thing which then has to aggregate with other mechanisms. And it sounds like what Converse was doing is kind of similar to that.
I would guess so. Of course, Phil's work is, I mean, Tilly, of course, one of the broadest of his generation, and Phil's palette is much narrower.
We'll come back to some of these subjects. The topic of sociological imagination is kind of intriguing to me. I know it was the title of a book by C. Wright Mills, but when I think of a man like yourself, or a scholar like yourself, who has considered a range of different social topics, what's the role of imagination in trying to figure out how you want to treat those topics?
Yeah. Well, for me, I mean, this is a reflection of where my career has gone, because I was trained as a mainline empiricist, and I did, you know, for my doctoral dissertation, I did a comparative study of correctional institutions for delinquents, and my next major study, picked by a graduate student, that's a wonderful story, but I don't think you got room for it, was a study of the Ymca of Chicago. And that was treated historically, both the YMCA in general. Why did the YMCA not become a religion, since it was an evangelical, interdenominational, evangelical organization in its roots? And so early in its history, you see some people say, well, heck, we've got something going here. We ought to become a general religion, and pushed down by the board at the time, because the board was made up of representatives of different denominations, Protestant denominations, and they didn't want to be associated with this general movement. So early in the history, you see a couple of cases where either a YMCA secretary went on to got out of the YMCA, a very famous evangelist out of Chicago, Dwight Moody, in Moody Bible Institute. He had been a YMCA secretary, and he realized if he was really going to do religion, he should leave the Y. And okay, so I tell you this because I start out doing very empirical, close to vest research. I end up as writer of theoretical essays, and at some point I found my métier. You know, I found what I seemed to be good at, and it turned out what I seemed to be good at was a middle-range theory formulation based upon a leap, and this is the connection to an imagination, very often based upon going between two different areas, what I sometimes others have called analogical theorizing. And so if I've done anything, I've used analogies to build theory. Taken an analogy from the state or from the economy to develop the political economy of organizations, for instance. Studying social movements from in organizations as a leap from saying, oh, organizations are polities just like the state. And in various ways, this characterizes all of the, if there are some major things I've done, and some people think there are, and I sometimes think there are too, but I also have my own doubts sometimes. But it will be because I had this quality of imagination. It certainly wasn't that I was better at data gathering or big empirical studies. Some people can do both.
And we sometimes think of great writers, I mean, like novelists or painters, as having kind of breakthrough new ways of representing the given. Picasso, say, or, I don't know, a 20th century novelist. And I guess we associate imagination with that, that they have a new way of representing the world. Somehow that seems relevant to science as well. It seems relevant to sociology.
There's a guy I haven't read, Banowski, but one of my friends at the university is Bill Birdsall, who's an economist who teaches freshman seminars, and Banowski emphasizes the parallels between art and science, actually, and so there is imagination, and as we sing in the Picasso case, even though it's new, for a certain period you can see the direct borrowings he made. So there was an African period, and that's for all of Cubism, and at the Picasso Museum in Paris, which is around kind of chronologically with what was going on in the art world and in French cultural thinking at different stages, and how those ended up coming through Picasso. And so they, for instance, in one section of the museum, they have a variety of African statues, and they're contrasted with Picasso's work from the period. And you see, wow, did he take... He borrowed it, of course he abstracted from it, and he put it on in paint usually. And the statues were, and the paintings all look very abstract and cubistic from that period, but you can see the overlap with the masks and the statues from Africa that they have on showing.
I remember seeing some photographs of Freud's study, the office that he worked in, and lots of African totems and statues and so forth. And I guess a similar connection was made that, from these very concrete material artifacts, some theoretical ideas about the consciousness and the ego and so forth. So that's an interesting point.
Incidentally, you can spot a number of people around the discipline. Some people have one big idea, and they push it very hard, and that's fine. And some people you can make a and then they wouldn't think that they had just one big idea, but you could see a kind of lineage to their work that builds off of both methodological commitments and a few key theoretical ideas, and then it ends up working in different directions and so on.